Toby the Tram Engine by the Reverend W. Audrey. Read and adapted by Joshua Boston. Toby and the Stout Gentleman. Toby is a tram engine who lived north of the island of Sodor. He is short and sturdy, and he has cowcatchers and side plates, and he doesn't look like a steam engine at all. He would take freight cars from farms and factories to the main line, and the big engines would then take them to London and elsewhere. Toby's tram line ran along roads and through fields and villages. He rings his bell cheerfully to everyone he meets. He has a coach named Henrietta, and she's seen better days. She complained because she had no passengers. Toby is attached to Henrietta, and he always takes her with him. As he says, "Well, you never know. She might come in very useful one day." But Henrietta, I'm sorry to say, was never very happy.
"It's not fair! It's not fair at all! Just look at all those buses full of passengers, and I've got none! I remember the day when it used to be full of passengers, and I have 9 freight cars behind me. But now, there are only 3 or 4.
Yes, it was very sad, because now the farms and factories sent their goods mostly by lorry. Toby was always careful on the road. Buses, lorries, and cars often have accidents. Toby hasn't had an accident for years, but the buses are often crowded, whereas Henrietta was mostly empty. It puzzled Toby, and he would ponder to himself, "I can't understand it. I can't understand it." People came to see Toby, and they usually came by bus. They would stare and laugh at him. "Isn't he quaint?" they would say, and they made Toby very cross. One day, a car stopped close by, and a little boy jumped out, calling out to his sister, "Come on, Bridget, come on!" And together they ran across to Toby. 2 ladies and a very stout gentleman followed. The gentleman looked important, but nice. He was, of course, Sir Topham Hatt, on holiday with his grandchildren, but Toby didn't know this yet. "Come on, grandfather," called the children as they ran back to him. "Do look at this engine." And seizing his hands, they almost dragged him along. "That's a tram engine, Stephen," said Sir Topham Hatt.
"Is it electric?"
asked Bridget. "Electric?" spluttered Toby. "Shh," said Stephen. "You've offended him."
"But trams are electric, aren't they?"
"Most of them are," said Sir Topham Hatt, "but this is a steam tram."
"May we go in it, grandfather, please?"
"Oh, very well," chuckled Sir Topham Hatt. He called to the conductor to wait for them, and then he and his family clambered into Henrietta.
"Hip, hip, hooray!"
chanted Henrietta. But Toby was still furious and didn't sing as he took them for a ride around to the junction. "Electric indeed! Electric indeed!" he snorted. He was proud of being a steam train. When they arrived at the junction, they waited for Toby to take them back to their car. "What is your name?" asked Sir Topham Hatt. "Toby, sir." "Well, thank you very much, Toby, for a very nice ride." "Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, sir." And then Toby said to himself, "Now, this gentleman knows how to talk to engines." He felt better now. The children came every day for 2 weeks. Sometimes they rode with the conductor, sometimes they rode in empty cars, and on the last day of all, the driver invited them into the cab. All were very sorry when they had to go away, and Sir Topham Hatt and his family thanked everyone. "Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. Come again soon," said Toby as he left the station.
"We will! We will!"
called Stephen and Bridget, and they waved until Toby was out of sight. The months passed. Toby had fewer and fewer freight cars, and even fewer passengers. At last, one day, his driver woke him up with sad news. "This is our last day, Toby," he sighed. "The manager says we must close tomorrow." That day, everyone wanted a chance to have one last ride. The people joked and sang, but Toby and his driver and fireman wished they didn't. "Goodbye, Toby," they said afterwards. "We are so very sorry that your line is closing down." "So am I," sighed Toby, and he puffed very sadly to his shed. The driver and fireman oiled and greased him one last time. They shut the shed doors, and Toby went unhappily to sleep. The next morning, the shed doors flung wide open. Toby woke up with a start to see his fireman dancing a jig outside, and the driver was jumping up and down with joy and glee. He was waving a sheet of paper in hand. "Wake up, Toby! Wake up!" he cried. "Listen to this, my boy! The mail has just arrived, and this is a letter from the stout gentleman. Maybe it's good news." So Toby listened. But I mustn't tell you any more, or I shall spoil the next story. Thomas in trouble. There's a line to a quarry at the end of Thomas's branch line. It goes for some distance along the road. Thomas was always very careful to whistle here in case anyone was coming. Early one morning, there was no one on the road, but a large policeman was sitting on the grass close to the line. He was shaking a stone from his boot. Thomas liked policemen. He had been firm friends to the officer who used to live in the village, but had just retired. "Peep, peep," he whistled. "Good morning." The policeman jumped and dropped his boot. He scrambled up and hobbled around on one leg until he was facing Thomas. Thomas was hoping to see that the new officer would be friendly too, but he was sorry to see that he didn't look friendly at all. He was red in the face and very cross, and he was wobbling around trying to keep his balance. "Disgraceful," he spluttered. "I didn't sleep a wink last night. It was so quiet, and now engines suddenly come up whistling behind me. My first day in the country, too. I wish I never had been transferred." He picked up his boot and hopped over to Thomas. "I'm sorry, sir," said Thomas. "I only said good morning." The policeman grunted, and leaning against Thomas's buffer, he put his boot back on. Then he drew himself up, turned around, and pointed back at Thomas. "Where's your cow catcher?" he asked. "But I don't catch cows, sir." "Don't be funny," snapped the policeman. He looked at Thomas's wheels. "No side plates either." And he wrote in his notebook. "Engines going on public roads must have their wheels covered and a cow catcher in front to protect people and animals from being dragged underneath their wheels if they should stray onto the line. You haven't, so you are dangerous." "Rubbish," said Thomas's driver. "We've been along here hundreds of times and never had an accident." "That makes it worse," the policeman answered. He wrote the words "regular lawbreaker" in his book. Thomas puffed slowly and sadly away. Sir Topham Hatt was having breakfast. He was eating toast and marmalade. Just then, the butler came in. "Excuse me, sir, you're wanted on the telephone." "Bother that telephone," said Sir Topham Hatt. "I'll be back in just a minute, my dear," he said to his wife. But when he came back, he looked concerned. "I'm sorry, my dear. Thomas is in trouble with the police, and I must go at once." He gulped down his coffee, picked up his hat, and hurried out of the room. At the station, Thomas's driver told Sir Topham Hatt what had happened. "Dangerous to the public indeed! We'll see about that." Sir Topham Hatt spoke to the policeman. A crowd collected. Other policemen came to see what was happening. But however much he argued with them, it was no good. The law is the law, they said, and we can't change it. Sir Topham Hatt felt exhausted. I'm sorry, driver, he said, mopping his face. It's no use arguing with policemen. We'll have to make one of those cowcatcher things for Thomas, I suppose. Thomas was horrified. Everyone will laugh, sir, he cried. They'll say I look like a tram. Sir Topham Hatt stared. Then he laughed. Well done, Thomas. Why didn't I think of that before? We need a tram engine. When I was on my holiday, I met a nice little engine called Toby. He takes freight cars from the farms, but the lorries are taking over much of his work and he needs a change. He has cowcatchers and side plates. I'll write to his superintendent at once. A few days later, Toby arrived. Well done, Toby. That's a good engine, said Sir Topham Hatt. I see that you've brought Henrietta, too. You don't mind, do you, sir? Said Toby. The station master was thinking of making her into a henhouse, and that would never do. No, indeed, said Sir Topham Hatt. We couldn't allow that. Toby made the freight cars behave even better than Thomas did. At first, Thomas was jealous, but he was so pleased when Toby rang his bell one day and frightened the policeman. They have been firm friends ever since. Dirty objects. Toby and Henrietta were enjoying their new job on the island of Sodor, taking workmen to the quarry every morning. But they do look old-fashioned and needed new paint. At the junction, they often met James. Whenever he saw them, James was very rude. Yuck! What dirty objects, he would say. At last, Toby lost his patience. James, he asked, why are you red? I am a splendid red engine, replied James, ready for anything. You'll never see my paint dirty. Oh, said Toby innocently. So that's why you need bootlaces once, to be ready, I suppose. James went redder than ever and snorted off. It was such an insult to be reminded of the time that a bootlace had to be used to mend a hole in one of its coaches. At the end of the line, James left his coaches and got ready for his next train. It was a slow freight, stopping at every station to pick up and set down cars. James hated slow freight trains. Dirty cars from dirty sidings. Yuck! Starting with only a few, he picked up more and more cars at each station till he had a long train. At first, the freight cars behaved well, but James bumped them so crossly that they were determined to pay him out. Presently, running over the viaduct, they approached the top of Gordon's Hill. Heavy freight trains halt here to pin their brakes. James had had an accident with cars before and should have remembered this. Wait, James, wait, called his driver, but James wouldn't wait. He was too busy thinking about what he would say to Toby when they next met. All too late, James saw where he was, and he tried to stop. The freight car's chance had come. Hurrah! Hurrah! They laughed, and banging their buffers, they pushed him down the hill. The conductor tightened his brakes until they screamed, but the cars didn't care. On! Faster! 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 They yelled. I've got to stop! I've got to stop! Groaned James, and setting his brakes, he managed to check the car's mad rush, but they were still going much too fast to stop in time. Through the station they thundered and lurched into the goods yard. Disaster lay ahead. Horrors! Cried James and shut his eyes. There was a bursting crash, and something sticky splashed all over James. He had run into 2 tar wagons and was black from smokebox to cab. James was more dirty than hurt, but the tar wagons and a few freight cars were all to pieces. The breakdown train was in the yard, and they soon tidied up the mess. Toby and Percy were sent to help, and they came as quickly as they could. "Look here, Percy," exclaimed Toby. "Whatever is that dirty object?"
"That?" inquired Percy. "That's James. Didn't you know?"
"It's James's shape," said Toby. "But James is a splendid red engine, and you never see his paint dirty." James closed his eyes tightly and pretended he hadn't heard. They cleared away the unhurt freight cars and helped James home. Sir Topham Hatt was there to meet them. "Well done, Toby and Percy," he said. Then he spoke sternly to James. "Fancy letting your cars run away on you. I am surprised. You're not fit to be seen. You must be cleaned at once, James. And Toby shall have a nice new coat of chocolate and blue paint." "Thank you, sir," said Toby. "Can Henrietta have one too?" "Certainly, Toby. I think a scarlet orange color like Annie and Clarabelle will do nicely." "Oh, thank you, sir. She will be pleased indeed." All James could do was watch Toby as he ran off happily to tell Henrietta the news. Mrs. Kindly's Christmas. It was nearly Christmas time on the island of Sodor. Annie and Clarabelle were packed full of people and parcels. Thomas was having some very hard work pulling them. "Come on, come on, come on," he said to himself. Annie and Clarabelle also complained.
"We feel so full! We feel so full!"
Just then, Thomas looked up at a hill ahead. "Can I do it? Can I do it?" he asked tiredly. Suddenly, he saw a handkerchief waving outside the cottage window. He felt better at once. "Yes, I can! Yes, I can!" Thomas pulled his hardest, and he was soon through the tunnel and resting at the station. "That was Mrs. Kindly who waved to you, Thomas," said his driver. "She has to stay in bed all day." "Oh, poor lady," sympathized Thomas. "I am sorry for her." Engines have heavy loads at Christmas time, but Thomas and Toby didn't mind the hard work when they saw Mrs. Kindly waving. But then it began to rain. It rained for days and days. Thomas didn't like this weather at all. Mrs. Kindly couldn't wave on wet days. Nonetheless, every time he passed by her cottage, he would whistle to her. Its white walls stood against the dark background of the hills. One day, Thomas was approaching the cottage when the fireman noticed something. The driver came across the cab. "Something's gone wrong there!" For there, hanging, flapping, and bedraggled from a window of Mrs. Kindly's cottage, was something that looked like a large red flag. "Mrs. Kindly needs help, I expect," said the fireman. He put on the brakes, and Thomas gently came to a stop. The conductor came squelching through the rain and mud up to Thomas's cab, and the driver pointed toward the flag. "See if there's a doctor on the train and ask him to go to the cottage. Then walk back to the station and tell them that we've stopped." The fireman went to see if the line was clear up front. 2 passengers left the train and went up to the cottage. Then the fireman returned. "We'd better back down to the station so Thomas can get a good start," suggested the driver. "We shan't get up that hill," replied the fireman. "Come and see what's happened." They walked along the line around the bend. "Jiminy Christmas!" exclaimed the driver. "Go back to the train. I'm going to the cottage." He found the doctor with Mrs. Kindly. "Are you all right, Mrs. Kindly?" he asked.
"Oh, thank you. I am, yes. It was silly of me to faint, wasn't it?" chuckled Mrs. Kindly. "At least you saw the red bathrobe hanging out the window. Are you all safe?"
"Yes, thank you, ma'am. I've just come to say thank you. There's a landslide in the cutting, doctor. Mrs. Kindly saw it from the window, and she stopped us. She just saved our lives. God bless you, ma'am." Then the driver went back to the train. They cleared the line by Christmas Day, and the sun shone as a very special train puffed up from the junction. First came Toby, then Thomas with Annie and Clarabelle, and last of all, but pleased to come along, was Henrietta. Sir Topham Hatt was there, along with lots of other people who wanted to say thank you to Mrs. Kindly. The engines whistled and called out when they reached the cottage. "Merry Christmas!" they said. The people got out and climbed to the cottage. Thomas and Toby wished they could too. Mrs. Kindly's husband met them at the door. Sir Topham Hatt, Thomas's driver, fireman, and conductor went up to give her some presents. Mrs. Kindly was very pleased. "You're all very good to me," she said happily. "Thank you." "The passengers and I hope that you will accept these tickets to the South Coast, Mrs. Kindly," said Sir Topham Hatt. "We hope that you will get much better in the sunshine. We certainly cannot thank you enough for preventing a serious accident. I hope that we have not tired you. Good day, and Merry Christmas." Then, going quietly downstairs, they joined the group outside the window and sang some carols. "We wish you a Merry Christmas, we wish you a Merry Christmas, we wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year." Mrs. Kindly now lives in Bournemouth, getting better every day. And Thomas and Toby are looking forward to the time when they can welcome her home once again.